This video is an introduction to English smocking. Abby Harrison graduated from UCA Fashion Textiles in 2020, and she used the gathering technique extensively throughout her collection to distort the prints that she'd made by hand. To do this, Abby used a pleating machine as she had so much to do, but today I'm going to be showing you the same technique but how to do it by hand. I'm using some lined paper to make a template for where all the stitches are going to go. It's going to be 15 centimetres across, and I'm placing the dots 5mm apart. I use the edge of the pad to line up my paper. Usually I'd use a friction pen, but you can't see the yellow on this fabric, so I'm going to mark it with a pencil. And then just mark each dot. Then when you get to the end, move it across and line it up, and then just carry on until you've gone the whole way across the width of fabric that you're using. So I'm using 2 pieces of thread. It's just normal sewing thread. I've tied a knot in the end. And it's just a running stitch, so you're going into one dot and up to the next. And you just keep going straight along until you've threaded the whole piece of fabric. I'm stitching 7 rows of gathering here, and once it's all done you can see that all the stitches are underneath each other. Then just pull the end threads and gather it together. Be careful here not to snap one. Just pull it gently, move the fabric along as you go until you've got it the width that you want it to. Once you're happy with the width, you can tie a knot in the ends of the smocking threads to keep them secure. The fabric that I started with was 60 centimetres wide, and the gathered section is now 10 centimetres wide, so it's 6 times as much fabric. And once that's done, I'm going to show you how to do a cable stitch. For the smocking stitches, I'll be using 3 strands of embroidery thread. And then if you're right-handed, you're going to start from the left. And I'm going to skip that top row, that's my holding row, and put my needle through underneath and come up through that pleat there. So I'm going to leave my thread go out the top there, and so I'll start on one, go on to the next one, pull it through, and that's my first stitch done. Now my thread is pointing down. So I've got, the first one was an up cable, this one's a down cable. So I'm going across one, into the next one, and I'm going about a third down on the pleat. Okay, so threads on up again. And then down. And then you just keep going the whole way along. if your thread, when you came to do the next one, was on the wrong side, so I should be doing an up one now, but I'm doing a down one instead, you can just slip your thread under the last stitch that you did and pull it so that it's on the right side. Okay, so I've got to the end of the row of cable stitch and I've got my thread there, so I'm just going to poke it through the valley of my last stitch so that it comes out on the back. And then I'm just going to stitch it through there, making sure it doesn't come through the other side, and tie a knot in it. The next stitch I'm going to show you is the wave stitch. It works just the same as the cable stitch. So you'd bring your thread up from the bottom of your fabric and then skip over one and go through the next one. And then instead of doing the down one directly underneath it, I'm going to move down to the next smocking row so I can see my thread there. So the next one that I would stitch would be this one here. And then complete the other side of that. So skip across one, go across to the next one, and I'm making sure that I'm keeping my needle parallel with the other stitches that I've done before. So then I move up to the top. So if it was a cable stitch, my next one would be there, but it would be here for this one. So stitch through there and then go back down to the next stitch, which is on the bottom. The other thing you can do is make sure you've got 2 rows between each one. And make sure you're going down by at least a third each time. I finished off that row of wave stitch and then mirrored it underneath again, so that's just wave stitch but in the opposite direction. And then underneath that row I did another row of cable stitch. The last stitch I'm going to show you is the trellis stitch. This one's made up of 8 stitches going from the top to the bottom over 2 rows of the smocking. So to do that, again you'd start over on the left if you're right-handed, and then go through the top 2, and then when you're going down to the next ones, if you line your needle up, when you do your first row you could take some time to be really careful about the spacing, and then after that you can just copy it for each one. So again, I'm only going through 1 pleat each time. So the 4th one is on the line where the smocking is. And I'm still going down a third of the pleat. And then when I get to the bottom row, that one's on the same level. And then we start going back up. Again, just follow the line that you made before. Once you've completed all the embroidery that you want to do, it's time to undo the gathering stitches that you did. I'm going to leave the first row in because I want to show you how you'd finish the edge with some bias binds in, and then take these other ones out. As this is a sample and I haven't got anything to attach to the sides of it, I'm just going to fold the extra fabric, which would be my seam allowance, over so that you can't see it. I also noticed that I stitched on the side that had the pencil markings on, so I should have stitched on the back of it. They'll come out if I give it a wash though, so that's okay. I've cut a strip of bias binding from the fabric that I've used for the main fabric, and I've cut that at a 45-degree angle to the warp, and now I'm going to pin it in place. And then with the smocking thread that I've left in there, I'm going to use that as my guideline for stitching. So I've stitched down along there. I've done that by hand because it was only small, but you could do it by machine as well. And then turn it up like that. Flip it over. And then I'm going to fold the top edge to the centre, fold it over again, and then I'm going to stitch this part here down to the original stitching line. Okay, so that's the binding finish on the neckline. That's the outside, that's the inside. It's always better to finish binding by hand if you have the time, but it's perfectly fine to do it on the machine if you've got a lot to do or you need to finish something really quickly. Here's a picture of the final sample pinned to the dummy, and then by using the clone tool in Photoshop I was able to experiment to create 2 other possible ideas for tops.